I just had a client come to me, and she's categorized as obese or has obesity, and she used Ozempic, which is semaglutide. So the weight loss drug, she had lost approximately 60 pounds, and then she regained that and more. So she had used it, I want to say it was about a year and a half ago,
Wow.
and she used it for somewhere in the range of like 8 to 9 months. So she's been off the drug in a very equivalent time from the amount of time that she took it. So, time on, time off, she's been off for the exact same time that she was on, but she lost 60 pounds. And I believe she gained, when she came to me initially 2 months ago, had gained around 75 pounds. And now, actually, if you look in the research literature on Ozempic, on semaglutide, and some of those forms of the GLP-1 receptor agonist drugs, a lot of times we see rapid weight loss. So in one of the clinical studies, they saw in an 18-month trial, they lost around 15.3% of their weight. They lost during that period. However, when they looked at the regain statistics within a year, now mind you, they were on the drug for 18 months, so a much longer time period than a year. Within a year, they had regained between 60 and 70% of that. So we can kind of extrapolate that out and realize that within that year, they had only within the year of being on the drug, they had only lost about 70% of the total weight that they actually lost in the end. So we see very similar weight gain statistics as compared to even lifestyle and diet interventions, where 6 out of 7 people who go on a diet will lose a substantial amount of weight, but within 3 years, we see about a 95% recidivism rate, meaning they regain what they lost during that initial diet. And so I had this woman come to me, and we're literally working on, it's not calorie tracking, it's not macro tracking. We're looking for daily habit wins. And I have her doing it on pretty much a checklist. So it's hit 3 adequate protein servings the size of your fist, essentially. Make sure to try to do lean proteins. I have a fruit and veggie serving for her. So I want 3 to 4 servings of fruit and veg per day at a minimum. Now she could backfill that. So I have it where she has like what I would refer to as like a sample meal plan or a sample a day of eating for her, but she doesn't have to follow that. It's really just based down to the habits. I want her hitting a step count, going for post-meal walks because she does have a high degree of insulin resistance. She would be categorized, if she hadn't been on the drug previous to that, she was categorized as type 2 diabetic. The weight loss initially had brought her down under that range. So now she's actually out of remission and back to type 2 diabetes. But this is something with weight loss that she has been able to put in remission. So right now she's type 2 diabetic, but she suffers from insulin resistance regardless. And so post-meal walks, we've been shown to help with insulin sensitivity. There's a study that shows, when they do a lifestyle intervention, they lose 7% of your body weight and do 150 minutes of aerobic activity. They have a double they double the amount of people that didn't go into diabetes or type 2 diabetes than metformin, which is, glucophage, which is probably the most prescribed type 2 diabetic drug on the market. So we're really just going for daily wins. We're looking for habits. We're looking for her to drink a sufficient amount of water because she was someone that only drank caffeinated beverages or sugar sweetened beverages. It's just like, let's go from, your full sugar Coke to Diet Coke. Let's go from, the fact that you don't drink water at all. I want you to do a water preload with 8 to 16 ounces of water before every meal, because it's going to help with the gastric stretching, which helps with, initiating satiety. And we see in actually randomized control trials that you could decrease your energy intake at a subsequent meal by taking in 16 ounces of water, 15 to 30 minutes before that meal. And it's about 100 to 150 calorie reduction that we see. So these are little things that they're just habit stacks. You're going to eat 3 times a day, just go for a walk after it. Or, if it comes down to taking certain supplements, like put them next to your toothbrush, because you're going to brush your teeth every single morning. So just take them in the morning. So these are super simple steps, and it's completely different than what I would use with a competitive athlete. But also, she's in a completely different place in her life. Her priorities are different. And the things that she's looking for, she's not looking to maximize body composition. She's trying to get out of an obese category that's compromising her health. And she wants to be here for a better quality of life for herself and then her kids.
Well, I'm glad you brought up some of those habits, because again, depending on who is listening in the audience, there is a huge difference, I think, in interest of certain things we're talking about here. Like, when you say, oh, can you drink more water, right? Or can you switch from Coke to Diet Coke? Sometimes that to a lot of listeners right now, that's probably so basic, right? It's just like, oh, of course, I'm not just going to be guzzling Coke, for example, right? Where I need a little bit more sleep. But to most people out there, right, to the average American person just trying to lose weight, I think even for me, it's easy to forget how important some of these things are and how much of a change they can make. Because, again, having tracked calories for so long, it's just like, well, just reduce the calories. But it's like, yeah, but how do you do that, right? And a lot of these habits are a huge part. I want to go back a little bit to the GLP-1 agonist, because you mentioned that she had, that's a very hot topic right now, right? And one of the criticisms that I don't necessarily agree with, but I want to see more research on, is that, some people have put out, well, they cause a lot of muscle loss, to which I would argue, yes, but they reduced appetite, which caused huge calorie deficits in people who were not working out. And if you took anybody and put them on a crash diet, for example, and had them cut their calories in half without working out, they would lose a lot of lean body mass. So how do you feel about GLP-1 agonists for somebody who, let's say, is overweight, not obese, wants to make dieting easier, and is working out? Do you shy away from that at this point? Are you open to the idea?
Yeah, so I will say that I'm open-minded, but not so open that my brain would fall out. And so that's a really good way to encompass how I feel about
Yeah,
GLP-1 agonists. I see a lot of people that are using them for what's called cosmetic weight loss, meaning that they don't actually have a pathology that would lead them to actually needing this drug. Let's think about what it's really intended for. A GLP-1 receptor agonist is to help with the secretion of GLP-1, which is an appetite-suppressing hormone. However, it's also being done because it's an incretin, which means it increases insulin production. And so within that, that helps to lower, your glucose excursions, your blood glucose levels, and then it also helps with rectifying diabetes as well as insulin resistance. So that's actually what the drug was intended for. I know a lot of people are focusing just on the weight loss aspect of them, which they have an incredible weight loss aspect of them, but it's really what they were intended for was diabetics. And so really when it comes down to it, if someone has some underlying pathologies, like say for instance, they're categorized as obese and they have type 2 diabetes, I think that if they're that makes them a candidate essentially for GLP-1 receptor agonist. But I also know, and this is like a really I guess, deep rabbit hole to go into. But I'm going to be honest with you. A lot of people within the contest prep bodybuilding scenario are looking at GLP-1 agonists to suppress appetite during contest prep. And I don't think that's a good
sure.
application. So
Yeah.
these guys are already lean. They're capable of implementing the habits from a behavioral, from a nutrition, from a training, from an energy expenditure in terms of physical activity, cardio, and things of that sort. They have every capability in the world. Also, they're hugely motivated and driven. And I know this because I've worked with plenty of them. Yet they want to use a drug to make it easier. And I don't think that's a great application of this. I think that could be a slippery slide, like because we have to realize that they're messing with polypharmacy, and so they're going with a multitude of androgens. They're using fat burning agents, clenbuterol, beta two adrenergic receptor agonists, and things of that sort. And then they're adding in this weight loss drug. And what's really common, and if we actually look, I believe Eric Helms did a review on this with I'm forgetting the researcher's name, but he's big into the binge eating area of the literature. And they did one where they essentially showed like the prevalence of binge eating post show from in contest prep competitors, and that it's
Mhm.
one of the most common situations that we find ourselves in. And I'll tell you, I've done 15 preps before, and I had one
Wow.
show that I binge ate after. And it was the first prep. No coach had told me how to, there was no reverse dieting, recovery dieting, none of that. This is 2013, 2014. And the coach gave me no plan, didn't answer me the day after the show. And I didn't know what to do. I was ravaged with hunger. Like, unless you've been to 5% body fat or lower, or even if you've been just, very lean, 8%, 7%. Dave, I know you've been lean yourself. You know that there's this overwhelming hunger. And it's actually termed to or referred to as hyperphagia, which is like this unquenchable desire to eat past your homeostatic mechanisms. So we have two types of hunger. We have homeostatic hunger, which is regulated by energy status, like your energy intake as well as your body fat levels. That's your true physiological hunger, which you're driven to eat things or driven to eat food because you need energy, but it's not specific. Then we have hedonic hunger or non-homeostatic hunger, which is driven by the environment, driven by emotions, stress, lack of sleep, things of that sort. And really we see it's more hedonistic when you're post show, and then it's combined with the homeostatic hunger because now you have a lack of energy stores. So contest prep competitors are really driven to overeat after, and that's why we see so many individuals that they end up ballooning up like a week after their show. They almost look like they undid all 16 weeks of that contest prep. And so my issue with this is you got during the prep itself, you're going to feel ravaged with hunger, especially around 4 weeks out. I'll say that from my personal experience and having worked with many, hundreds of clients at this point that have done competitions. But if you suppress that entire time, because what many people report on GLP-1 receptor agonists is it's so incredibly powerful in terms of appetite suppression. And it works on the brain, it works on the gut, it works on all these different facets. You're not going to be experiencing that, so you don't even know it's coming. But say you get off the drug because you aren't a diabetic and you're paying out of pocket. And if you actually look at like the out of pocket costs for something like semaglutide, it's like $1,000 a month. Most people
Mhm.
aren't going to be able to afford that for any elongated period of time. So now, if you go from complete appetite suppression, you don't even know it's coming. And it's almost like it hits you like a ton of bricks. You got off, you're extremely lean, and that helped you get lean. But now you're in this post-show period where all bets are off. You don't have a goal in sight, and now you're first of all, you're already predisposed to overeat in that state to begin with. But now you don't have the drug intervention there. And so either you become reliant on that drug and you continue using it for an elongated period of time when you don't need it, or you get off the drug and then it's almost like a slingshot effect. The more you pull back on something, the further forward it launches you.
Yeah, I think there are obviously a lot of implications. I do think that potentially, like appetite suppression in general, I think is going to be one of the biggest factors for people to lose weight. In that, people will talk about like their metabolisms varying so much, and like obviously NEAT can vary a lot, right? So
Absolutely.
non-exercise activity thermogenesis. But I do think hunger is one of the biggest things that varies between individuals. And I think for people who obviously for contest prep, but any sort of dieting, the appetite suppression is going to be a big factor. I do worry right now with too many people using it, as you said, for cosmetic weight loss, and I guess where that could, especially if it's unregulated, and where people could go with that. I think when it comes to people who are using drugs for whether it's getting lean or for a specific contest, I kind of I've always categorized it as two different. Well, yeah, I've always kind of put it as two different categories. So you have the people who take drugs that just make it easier. And then you have people who take drugs that allow them to do something that just physically wouldn't be possible otherwise. So, for example, right, GLP-1 agonists, thyroid medication, clenbuterol, things like that, you could make an argument that it would allow you to get leaner than you otherwise could have. But for the most part, it's just making the calorie deficit easier. It's, maybe you don't have to do as much cardio, you don't have to suffer as much, etc. But pretty much anybody could lose fat. Whereas when it comes to anabolics, that is allowing somebody to get to something that is just not achievable otherwise, right? Like you literally could never naturally get as much muscle without the anabolics as you could with the anabolics. And so that doesn't mean necessarily one is right or wrong or whatever, but a lot of times I see some of those, I guess you call fat loss drugs almost as an easy way out. Whereas I think of some of these other things, like again, the anabolics, where it's like, all right, maybe you have a goal, and I personally believe almost everybody should be natural, but maybe you have a goal that requires anabolics if you really want to be an IFBB pro or whatever it is. And you just physically couldn't do that without anabolics in many cases. Does that make sense?